My ex-husband vanished with our savings 5 years ago. Now he has resurfaced wanting to make amends. I'm feeling really torn about a decision I made recently regarding my family, and I'd love to hear what others think. To give you some context, my life was flipped upside down about 8 years ago when my husband, Robert, blindsided me with the news that he was leaving me and the kids. He had met some girl online and said he had fallen for her. His announcement came out of nowhere and completely shattered me. Looking back, Robert had been acting distant and off for a few weeks leading up to this bombshell, but I brushed it off as stress from work. We had been married for over a decade, weathered so much together, and I had known him for what felt like forever, half of my life. The thought of him cheating never even crossed my mind. Then, one evening, Robert finally confessed. He admitted that he'd been talking to this woman named Isabella for the last 3 months, and he claimed she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Every word he said hit me like a punch to the gut. He went on about how their connection made him realize how unhappy he was in our marriage. Hearing him say all of that left me in pieces. He kept trying to reassure me that he still loved us, but he just couldn't ignore what he felt for her. He told me he had to meet her in person to figure out if this was the real deal. At that moment, my head was spinning, and I couldn't even process what was happening. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. My voice shook as I asked if he was really planning to leave me and the kids for some woman he had never even met. He nodded slowly, saying he didn't expect me to understand, but that he had thought it through and needed to do this for himself. He said he'd continue to support us financially but had to follow his heart and meet the so-called love of his life. My world just crumbled around me. I couldn't believe it. My husband, the father of my children, was leaving us for a stranger from the internet. My first reaction was to scream, beg, anything to stop him from going. But when I looked at him, I knew it was over. He had already made up his mind, and there was no changing it. Robert moved out the next week, leaving me to explain to the kids that their dad wasn't coming back. Emily, who was 9 at the time, had a million questions that I didn't have answers for. And Nathan, who was only 4, couldn't fully grasp what was happening and just clung to me, sensing that something was terribly wrong. He knew something was terribly wrong. I felt completely numb, shattered beyond words, but the only thing keeping me afloat during that time was my kids. They were my anchor, the reason I didn't completely fall apart. When I first told my family about what Robert had done, they had the same reaction as me. They just couldn't wrap their heads around why my husband of so many years would make such a selfish decision. My parents urged me to take legal action, but at that point, I was still holding on to some faint hope that Robert would realize his mistake and come back to us. Robert's parents were heartbroken when they found out. They tried calling him over and over, pleading with him to come to his senses, but he just repeated the same story to them. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, I was left to piece my life back together, both for myself and for the kids. Luckily, our family and friends rallied around us, offering support and helping me stay grounded. I threw myself into finding a job so I could give Emily and Nathan the stability they needed, but the pain of Robert's betrayal was always there, lurking in the background. During that tough period, Robert's parents were a huge help. They supported me financially when they could and often babysat the kids, giving me a much-needed break. 8 long years have passed since then, and Robert's presence in our lives has faded to nothing more than a distant memory. He used to send money here and there, but beyond that, there was no contact, no real relationship with me or the kids. Over time, I've come to fully embrace the role of a single mother, working endlessly to make sure Emily and Nathan had everything they needed, both emotionally and financially. Emily, for a while, would still ask about her dad and sometimes try to reach out, but eventually, she stopped. She learned not to bring him up anymore. Nathan, on the other hand, was so young when Robert left that his memories of him are almost non-existent. He never mentioned his dad and seemed to move on without much trouble. Despite losing their father, both of my children grew up to be remarkable people, and I couldn't be prouder of them. Recently, Robert's father passed away unexpectedly, and we attended the funeral. Afterward, the family lawyer reached out to me. He explained that Robert's father had left a small inheritance for the grandkids. While it wasn't a huge sum, It was enough to help with their college expenses, which was a big relief. I sat down with Emily and Nathan to share the news, telling them that college would no longer be something they had to worry about. Seeing their faces light up with excitement was one of the best moments I'd had in years. It felt like, after everything, a heavy burden had finally been lifted off our shoulders. Then, last week, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. To my shock, when I picked up, it was Robert on the other end of the line. A rush of conflicting emotions hit me the moment I heard his voice after all those years. I was completely speechless, unsure of how to even respond. After a brief pause, Robert hesitated before saying he needed to meet me urgently. His request left me confused, so I asked him to clarify. That's when he admitted he wanted to discuss some sort of offer and kept pleading with me, insisting that we had to meet face to face. I couldn't understand why now, after 8 years of silence. Where had all this urgency been when I was struggling on my own with our kids? Still, there was something about his repeated pleas that were hard to ignore. I took a deep breath, gathered my thoughts, and cautiously agreed to meet him, alone. We set up a time and chose a small cafe near my office for the rendezvous. After hanging up the phone, I was left with a flood of questions swirling in my mind. I felt a mix of anxiety and curiosity, wondering what this mysterious offer could possibly be. I decided not to tell Emily or Nathan anything about the call, at least not until I knew what this was all about. The days leading up to the meeting were an emotional roller coaster. Memories of the past kept playing in my head. The pain of Robert's sudden departure, the sleepless nights trying to make sense of it, and the constant struggle of raising 2 kids on my own. I couldn't help but wonder if meeting him was the right decision. On the day of the meeting, I arrived early, nervously sipping on a cup of coffee while waiting for him to show up. My heart was racing. It wasn't long before I saw Robert walk through the door. He approached with a strange combination of hesitation and determination. He looked different. Older, more worn down, like life had taken a toll on him. There was an awkwardness between us, filled with long silences and tentative words. We tiptoed around the obvious, exchanging polite greetings and small talk as though we were strangers trying to reconnect after years apart. Eventually, Robert mustered up the courage to explain why he had resurfaced out of nowhere. He began by telling me how things with Isabella hadn't gone at all the way he imagined. It turns out she had been hiding the fact that she was a single mother, something she only revealed after Robert had already left us and showed up on her doorstep. Their relationship quickly became rocky, mostly because of her gambling addiction, which drained every penny he had. They fought constantly, but Robert had clung to the idea of not giving up on someone else after leaving me and the kids. It wasn't until his father's sudden death that Robert started to realize how short and fragile life was. He admitted that, in the midst of his unhappiness, he often thought about us, about the family he left behind. He said he missed everyone and was deeply disappointed in the choices he made all those years ago. He then confessed that he had thought many times over the years about coming back but never had the strength to face what he had done. He then revealed that his father had left him their lake house, a massive property where we used to spend our vacations back before Robert abandoned us. He said he wanted to sell the house, which would set him up for life financially. I just nodded, listening quietly, unsure where this was headed. Then, Robert dropped a bombshell. He proposed that he wanted to come back into our lives, offering to give our children a luxurious life and promising that I would never have to work another day. He assured me that we could live comfortably, free from financial worries, if I accepted him back. I stared at him, completely floored. Robert seemed to believe that money could magically erase the last 8 years, that somehow we could reconcile and rebuild our family with the inheritance from his father. He painted this picture of a second chance, of a better life, as though the years of heartache and abandonment were nothing more than a distant memory. I weighed his words carefully, considering what the money could mean for our family. The idea of financial security was tempting, I won't lie about that, but I couldn't shake the memories of all those years when I had been alone, raising our children and struggling to keep everything afloat. As much as his offer seemed like an easy solution, I couldn't forget the pain, the anger, and the scars left by his absence. With a firm but steady voice, I told Robert that while I appreciated the offer, I couldn't just sweep the last 8 years under the rug. I reminded him that I had been the one raising our kids alone, juggling work and responsibilities, and while our life wasn't lavish, it was stable. I couldn't risk putting myself and my children through that kind of emotional turmoil again. I wasn't sure I could ever trust him not to leave us a second time. Robert's eyes filled with desperation as he pleaded with me to reconsider. I could see he was genuine, or at least he believed he was, but I knew that allowing him back into our lives would be a massive gamble. My heart ached at the thought of turning down the financial relief his offer could bring, but I couldn't overlook the emotional damage he'd caused. Since that meeting, my parents have been urging me to reconsider my decision. They argue that, after everything he put us through, the least he could do now is provide us with a better life, free from financial strain. They keep insisting that people can change, that maybe Robert truly regrets his mistakes and is serious about rebuilding our family. According to them, I'm being selfish by letting my own heartbreak get in the way of giving my children a more comfortable life. I've spent countless sleepless nights wrestling with my choice. Part of me wonders if I made the right decision, and the other part is terrified of what might happen if I let him back in. I haven't told Emily and Nathan about Robert's sudden reappearance yet. I worry about how they'll react, how they'll process the idea of their father coming back into their lives after being absent for so long. Re-entering their lives after 8 years of absence. I've been questioning my own judgment. Torn between the potential benefits of accepting Robert's offer and the painful memories of our past, I'm left wondering, am I the one at fault for rejecting Robert's offer and possibly keeping my children and me from a better life? Date 1. In just a few days, I received an overwhelming number of comments and messages from people. I'm relieved that most of you don't think I'm in the wrong. After taking everyone's advice to heart, I realized it was time to have an open and honest conversation with my children about Robert. The last thing I wanted was for him to suddenly reappear and take them by surprise. Today, after dinner, I sat down with Emily and Nathan to gently bring up the subject. I told them about their father's unexpected return and his offer to come back into our lives. Their faces showed a mixture of curiosity and confusion as they processed what I was saying. When I explained that Robert had inherited the lake house and wanted to sell it to provide for us financially, their reactions couldn't have been more different. Emily, now 17, went through a whirlwind of emotions: anger, shock, and disbelief. She couldn't grasp why her father would want to come back after all this time. She remembered him, and while there was a time she missed having a father figure, she had learned to live without him. The pain of his absence was something she had buried long ago, and she had no interest in reopening that wound. Emily made it clear that she didn't want him in her life anymore. Nathan, who's now 12, had a very different reaction. He admitted that he didn't remember Robert at all, so my decision to reject his offer didn't faze him much. He struggled to fully understand the situation, but in the end, he said he was happy with how things were and didn't feel the need for a father figure he never knew. I told them both that whatever they decided, I would respect their feelings and choices. Emily stood firm in her decision, expressing no desire to meet Robert, and Nathan agreed with her. I realized, in that moment, that although the idea of possibly repairing our family was tempting, the emotional scars ran deep. My children's well-being was my top priority, and their clear wishes reaffirmed that I had made the right choice when I walked away from Robert that day in the cafe. After this conversation, I knew it was time to talk to my parents about what to do next. Contrary to what some may think, I never planned to stay married to Robert. In fact, we were on the verge of divorce before he left. But when he vanished, I didn't have the resources to go through with it. Now, I've realized there's no reason to stay tied to him anymore. Update 2. Robert's calls have become more and more desperate over the past few weeks. No matter how many times I've ignored or rejected him, he continues to reach out, pleading with me to reconsider. No matter how much I explained to Robert that I didn't want him back, he just kept calling. As a non-confrontational person, I felt cornered and emotionally drained by his constant attempts to contact me. I started to worry that he might show up at my workplace or, worse, visit the kids at school, which made the situation even more stressful. That's when I decided to reach out to his mother, the one person who I thought might help me understand what was driving his relentless pursuit. When I met with her, I explained my decision to end things with him legally and expressed my frustration with the nonstop calls. It was during this conversation that she dropped a bombshell of her own. She revealed the real reason behind Robert's sudden persistence. His father had included a clause in the will that stated Robert could only inherit the lake house if he returned to our family. And to make things more complicated, I had to sign off on the paperwork for him to officially claim the property. Hearing this left me shocked and dismayed. Suddenly, it all made sense. Robert's push to reconcile wasn't about making amends or rekindling a genuine connection. It was about securing ownership of the house. The whole situation felt like a cruel manipulation of my emotions, and it became clear that I needed to take action. After realizing Robert's true intentions, I knew I couldn't stay in this toxic dynamic any longer, filled with manipulation and deceit. I immediately started looking for a lawyer to help me file for divorce and move forward with my life. My parents, who had previously urged me to reconsider his offer, quickly changed their stance. They realized, just like I did, that Robert hadn't truly changed over the years. They regretted ever telling me to listen to him and are now fully supportive of my decision to walk away. I blocked Robert's number to stop the constant harassment, and I'm planning to face him directly when I serve him with the divorce papers. Update 3. It's been 2 months since my last update, and I finally have some positive news to share. As I mentioned, I was preparing to serve Robert with divorce papers. To do this, I reached out under the pretense of meeting him. He quickly agreed. Around the same time, Emily and Nathan expressed a desire to meet their father one last time. They had lingering questions and felt it was important to have some closure, despite all the hurt from the past. We arranged to meet at a neutral spot, a local park where we used to have family outings before Robert left. When we arrived, Emily's eyes were filled with a mixture of curiosity and hurt. Skepticism filled Emily's eyes as she looked at her father, while Nathan clung to my side awkwardly. I started by telling Robert that I knew his real motive for contacting us after so long. He protested, claiming it wasn't just the clause in his father's will that prompted him, but that he genuinely wanted a second chance with us. I shook my head in disbelief, knowing I couldn't trust a word he said anymore. I told him that we were finished, and the least he could do was give our children some closure by answering their questions. He nodded solemnly. Emily started by asking if leaving us for another woman had been worth it. Robert hung his head in shame and mumbled that he had been lost and made a terrible mistake. Nathan, with his straightforward approach, asked if finding his happiness had been more important than staying with his children and wife. Robert took a deep breath, admitting that he hadn't been thinking clearly at the time and regretted leaving us. My children, perceptive and strong, weren't satisfied with those answers. Robert tried to justify his affair, saying it had been a midlife crisis. As the conversation continued, he shared painful details about his life with Isabella, the struggles they faced, and how he realized he had been chasing an illusion. Emily and Nathan listened carefully, though I could tell they didn't fully believe him. They asked why he had never stayed in touch and whether he truly regretted leaving us. I could feel the pain in their voices. Robert admitted that his guilt had overwhelmed him, and he didn't know how to face the consequences of his actions. He reiterated that he wanted to make things right, that he could provide us with a luxurious life now. But as I looked into my children's eyes, I knew the decision was clear. They didn't believe him, just like I didn't, and none of us were willing to let him waltz back into our lives, thinking money could fix the damage he'd caused. It was a matter of principle, standing up for the strength and resilience my children and I had built over the past 8 years in his absence. Determined, I told Robert that we had moved on and didn't need him or his money anymore. I then served him the divorce papers. He looked at them with a mixture of remorse and disappointment, pleading with me to reconsider, saying he genuinely wanted to make up for those lost years. When I stood firm, he offered to split the proceeds from the lake house sale, suggesting we could both benefit. But Emily spoke up before I could respond, telling him firmly that we didn't need his charity money. Nathan nodded in agreement, adding that we had everything we needed to be happy. At that moment, I think Robert finally realized the gravity of his mistakes. He began to cry, repeatedly apologizing to the kids, admitting how wrong he had been to leave us and that he understood we could never forgive him. As we walked away from the park, hand in hand with Emily and Nathan, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was a freedom I hadn't anticipated, and it dawned on me just how much of a burden I had quietly carried for the sake of my children. Watching my kids stand up for me, supporting and protecting me, was one of the most empowering moments of my life. Our divorce will proceed as I've decided, and while I know it will take time before I'm legally free of Robert, I'm at peace with my decision. In the meantime, I plan to take some time off work to spend quality time with Emily and Nathan. We're going to Disneyland, a trip we've been looking forward to for so long. I want to create new, beautiful memories with them, full of laughter and joy, to help replace the painful ones from the past. I know that as long as we have each other, we can face whatever the future holds with strength and resilience. Despite the challenges and emotional turmoil, my children and I are now on a path toward healing and building a stable, honest life. This chapter may not be over, but from now on, we will be writing our own story, one filled with love, trust, and growth. Since my last update, I have some exciting news to share. I was promoted at work. It feels like a huge accomplishment after all the hardships I've endured. It took me a long time to reach this position, but now, I'm finally earning a comfortable income that allows me to provide even more for my family. This promotion not only brings financial security but also a sense of pride, knowing that my hard work and dedication have paid off. Things are progressing well with the divorce proceedings. I've hired an excellent lawyer who, after hearing about the history between Robert and me, is confident that the process will be smooth. Although it may not be simple, I know it's necessary for our closure and a fresh start. Throughout this time, my family and friends have been a constant source of support, standing by my side. Now that I'm earning more than enough to cover our needs, I've decided to invest in my children's emotional well-being. I plan to send Emily and Nathan to therapy so they can process their emotions and work through any lingering abandonment issues. I've been researching therapists with expertise in helping children navigate complex emotions and found a compassionate and experienced therapist who specializes in family dynamics. As a parent, I believe therapy will be an essential part of their healing journey, giving them the tools to process what they've gone through and helping them grow into emotionally healthy adults. Meanwhile, I'm focusing on continuing to be the strong, stable foundation they can always rely on. We may have faced tough times, but I'm confident that together, we will continue to grow, heal, and thrive. In addition to focusing on their studies, I've been actively promoting the exploration of my children's interests. Emily has an extraordinary talent for art, and she spends hours creating beautiful paintings that now adorn our home. Watching her creativity flourish brings me so much joy. Nathan, on the other hand, has always been a natural on the soccer field. Our weekends are filled with his games, where we cheer him on from the sidelines. It makes me proud to see both of them thriving and finding their passions in life. As for Robert, we have not been in contact, and I believe it's best to keep it that way. But, as many of you correctly assumed, his former affair partner, Isabella, unexpectedly reached out to me. However, the message wasn't what I expected. Instead of an apology or any form of remorse for the role she played in breaking up my family, it was filled with anger and resentment. Isabella accused me of being the reason for her relationship with Robert falling apart, lashing out at me for taking him away from her. The messages were aggressive and unsettling. She called me names, questioned my motives, and claimed I had manipulated Robert into leaving her and coming back to our family. I couldn't believe the audacity. This woman, who had been a major factor in my family's destruction 8 years ago, was now blaming me for her relationship's failure. I took a deep breath before responding. I firmly told her that I had no interest in being with Robert, that I was in the process of getting a divorce, and that she had no right to contact me. I reminded her of the pain and confusion my family went through when Robert left us for her, and that my children had suffered immensely. I made it clear that if she needed someone to blame, she should look at herself and her own issues, like her gambling addiction, which had wreaked havoc on her life with Robert. After sending the message, I blocked her, hoping she wouldn't try to disrupt the peaceful life my children and I had built. Despite all the chaos, I still talked to Robert's mother from time to time, She's always been kind to me and has expressed her deep regret about how things turned out. She genuinely wants me to do whatever it takes to be happy. Interestingly, during one of our conversations, she revealed that because I chose not to reconcile with Robert, the lake house wouldn't be going to him after all. His father's will had conditions that Robert failed to meet, and as a result, he lost the property. This revelation was unexpected, but, in a way, it felt like a deserved outcome. Robert's selfish choices had not only shattered our family but caused pain elsewhere as well. It seemed fitting that his actions had finally caught up with him. Now, it's time to focus on the future and leave the past behind. I know this journey won't be easy, but the healing process is already well underway. My children and I are building a new life filled with love, growth, and, most importantly, peace. My kids are growing up so fast, and they're thriving in every way. With each new day, our future just keeps getting brighter. Now, on to the next part of my story. Story 2. My entire family abandoned me and cut off all contact when they thought I wasn't my dad's biological son. I grew up in what I thought was a happy household. My parents loved each other deeply, and they adored my siblings and me even more. They were always there for us. Attentive, caring, always putting our needs ahead of their own. My relationship with my parents was especially close. Even though my dad worked long hours to make sure we had everything we needed, he always found time to be with us when he could. He'd take us fishing, teach us how to play sports, and tell us stories about his own childhood. My mom was the glue that held it all together. She made amazing meals, helped us with homework, and made sure we were always clean and presentable. I loved them both, and I never doubted they loved me. But all of that came crashing down when my parents started fighting. I had always thought of them as the perfect couple. They had been together for as long as I could remember and rarely ever argued. But then, one day, everything shifted. It started with small disagreements, but before long, their fights became more frequent and much more intense. I tried my best to block it out, but it was impossible to ignore. I could hear them shouting at each other for hours, and every word came through my bedroom walls. Then one day, I overheard something that changed everything. My dad confessed to having an affair years ago. My mom was furious, and she hit back by admitting she had an affair, too. That argument exploded, and in the heat of it all, my dad questioned whether I was really his son. I was completely stunned. I had never once considered the possibility that he might not be my biological father. My mom just stood there in silence, looking at me with tears streaming down her face. But the guilt and shame were written all over her expression. My dad stormed out of the house, and my mom ran after him. After that, nothing was the same. My siblings took my dad's side and stopped speaking to me altogether. They were angry. Angry that my parents had cheated on each other, but even angrier that my mom might have had me with someone else. Suddenly, I was treated like an outsider in my own home. They looked at me with nothing but disdain, like I was a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. My once close siblings, who I had always been tight with, turned their backs on me. They blamed me for the mess our family had become. They said I was a constant reminder of our mom's betrayal, and that I probably wasn't even our dad's real son. Their words cut me to the core. I had always seen us as a tight-knit family, but now we were completely shattered. My parents had grown cold and distant, and my siblings were cruel and spiteful. I tried to talk to my parents, but they always seemed too preoccupied or distracted. It felt like their problems had swallowed them up, and they didn't have the time or the energy for me anymore. I became invisible to them. As for my siblings, they avoided me like the plague. They stopped inviting me to family get-togethers and cut off all communication. It was as if I no longer existed in their world. The rejection was unbearable, and I had no idea how to handle it. I felt like I had lost everything. My family, my home, and even a part of myself. I was utterly lost, with no idea how to find my way back. At first, I made an effort to reach out. I texted and called my siblings, hoping to have a real conversation and clear the air, but they never responded. I tried calling my parents too, but they were always busy or simply out of the house. Desperate for someone, anyone, to help me understand what was happening, I decided to go to my mom's house to talk in person. I thought maybe face-to-face things would be different. But when she opened the door, she told me to leave. She said I wasn't welcome there. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I could hardly believe what I was hearing. My own mother, the woman I had loved so deeply, was telling me to go away. After that, I spiraled. I fell into a deep depression, not knowing who I was anymore or where I fit in the world. I felt like a stranger in my own skin, and no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the emptiness. I stopped going to work, stopped hanging out with friends, and even gave up on the things I used to love. I spent most of my days curled up in bed, either sleeping or staring blankly at the ceiling. I barely ate, and the weight just fell off me. Months went by, turning into a year, and the darkness I was stuck in seemed endless. I lived close to my family, but it felt like I was on the other side of the world. My siblings and I had once been regulars at our parents' house, and now I couldn't even remember the last time I saw them. The isolation was suffocating. It wasn't until I started to realize how much my friends had been there for me that things began to shift. They'd call, check up on me, invite me to go out. At first, I turned them down, content to stay buried in my misery. But little by little, I began saying yes. We'd go to the movies, grab a bite to eat, or just hang out at home, doing nothing in particular. They made me feel like I wasn't completely alone, and I'll always be grateful for that. Eventually, I started focusing on my own well-being. I found a therapist and joined support groups to help me work through the overwhelming emotions. The pain of being rejected by my family still stung, but my friends became my lifeline during that dark time. I leaned on them more than ever. At first, I was reluctant to open up about what had happened. I was embarrassed and ashamed of my situation. But as time went on, I realized that talking about it helped me process everything. My friends were incredible. They listened without judgment and always knew the right thing to say, offering comfort and encouragement when I needed it most. I also found solace in things that once brought me joy, especially music. I picked up my guitar again after putting it aside when depression had me in its grip. Playing music became my escape, a way to pour out all my emotions, and it soothed me in ways nothing else could. Slowly but surely, as I started to take better care of myself, I noticed my mental health improving. The heaviness that had weighed me down for so long began to lift, and for the first time in a while, I found myself thinking about the future, my future. Through it all, my friends stuck by me. They cheered me on every step of the way and were there with a shoulder to cry on when things got tough. They reminded me that, even if my family had turned their backs on me, I wasn't alone. I had people who genuinely cared about me. Date 1. A few years later, something unexpected happened. My grandpa reached out to me. Out of the blue, he said he'd had enough of how the family had treated me and wanted to help make things right. He convinced me and my dad to take a paternity test. I'll admit, at first I wasn't sure. The last thing I wanted was to dive back into that mess, but at the same time, I needed to know the truth. When the results came back confirming I was, in fact, my dad's biological son, my family was floored. They were shocked, unable to believe they had made such a massive mistake. I could see the regret in their faces. They were truly sorry for the pain they had caused me and seemed desperate to set things right. I remember feeling incredibly torn. On one hand, part of me was overjoyed that my family wanted to make amends. It was something I had longed for, and it felt almost surreal to think that reconciliation was possible. But on the other hand, I couldn't just erase the hurt and betrayal I had experienced. They had abandoned me when I needed them most, and despite their apologies, I wasn't sure if I could simply forgive and forget. I had moved on. I had built a new life for myself, one that didn't revolve around my family. Letting them back in felt risky. What if they hurt me again? What if history repeated itself, and I found myself alone and heartbroken all over? Even as I wrestled with my emotions, my family didn't give up. They kept reaching out, calling me, sending letters, and even showing up at my doorstep. They begged for another chance, promising they'd do whatever it took to make things right.